Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the GrowVC Everyone Funding Startups podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Williams. I'm excited today to be talking about, in part, the state of the startup ecosystem in my native Southern California. And to do that today, I'm being joined by entrepreneur, author, and overall lean startup guru, Patrick Vlaskovits. Patrick, thanks for joining us today.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So I definitely want to talk about what's going on in Southern California. I also want to get into your upcoming book, The Lean Entrepreneur. But maybe before we can do that, maybe you could give our audience a little background about yourself and kind of how you became involved with the startup scene.
Sure. So I went to UC Santa Barbara, and my last year of college, my roommate and I, Jonathan Siegel, we actually, this is during the dot-com boom and bust, we actually started a tech venture. We actually started doing, we started taking Linux and basically kind of stripped out a kernel and use it as an embedded device. And this is right as people started really getting excited about Linux, and at the time it was sort of pretty neat, pretty innovative stuff. We turned that venture into a web development shop that kind of went up and down with the boom, and that was sort of my first sort of bite at the apple. After that, went to Europe for a few years, did some non-tech related stuff, came back to Southern California, was also sort of doing some non-tech stuff, which is in retrospect very silly and kind of stupid, to be honest with you. But then ended up doing 2 startups, failed miserably, had all sorts of problems, made all sorts of mistakes. But then came across Steve Blank's book, The 4 Steps to Epiphany, which effectively lit Epiphany inside of me in terms of how to sort of frame the problems that a technology startup has. And that's sort of been my story, and turned into at some level an accidental advocate for lean startups and customer development. That was never an aim of mine. I was sort of an early adopter. And so, I run the Lean LA group. It's at leanla.com. We have, I think, 2,400 members, and we have speakers that talk about lean startups and customer development and similar themes. I wrote the Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development with Brant Cooper, which has done really well. Self-published that book, and then we are finishing up the Lean Entrepreneur, which is a traditionally published book by Wiley, coming out this fall, October 2012.
So, Patrick, you mentioned the 4 Steps to the Epiphany being a pivotal read for you. Can you briefly describe for our readers who maybe aren't familiar with it, kind of what that book is about on an overall level and kind of how it has impacted the way you look at startups and the books that you have authored and are currently authoring? Sure.
So Steve Blank has many insights in that book, but one of the most profound and deceptively simple, right? And I say deceptively simply intentionally because once you say it, it sounds very obvious, but it certainly wasn't obvious to most people. And that is that most tech startups fail not because they don't manage to deliver a technology to the market. And so you're not supposed to use double negatives in English. What that means is that most startups do manage to deliver technology to market, but the market doesn't exist. So they fizzle out. And they manage to conquer the technical risk. They often manage to do some very cool stuff, very new and novel ways of combining technologies. But most often, the mortality rate is really affected by the fact that the mortality rate of startups is affected by the fact that there's no market that actually wants what they're delivering. And so Steve, this is sort of the fundamental insight of the 4 Steps to Epiphany. And Steve, throughout his career, had sort of stumbled upon this pattern and then started fleshing it out. And the methods he describes in the 4 Steps to Epiphany are about how you can actually go out and test your ideas in the marketplace and find customer segments, market segments that actually have a problem that you can then solve with technology. And it's how you actually go about de-risking the market risk, not marketing, but the market risk of your startup versus the technology risk, and making sure that when you actually get your technology built, does it actually satisfy real pain? Do people really want to pay for it? Do people really want to use it? Are people passionate about it? And I believe Steve published a book in 2005, 2006. Self-published a book. It was sort of a class notes to a lecture series he was giving at Stanford. And that book is a seminal book in sort of the terms of the lean startup history. It's a great book, full of insight. It can be a bit dense and tough to get through. And I would give it to my friends, and they wouldn't read it. I would get frustrated. So Brant Cooper and I decided to write a cheat sheet to it. So we rang up Steve and said, Steve, we love your book. We'd like to write a Cliff Notes version of your book. Would you bless this project? And luckily for us, he did. And that book's done really well.
And this book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, who is it written for? In other words, is I have an idea. Is that when I should read this book? I'm an early phase startup. Who is this book particularly useful for our entrepreneurs in the audience?
Great question. So the book, where the book fits in sort of the current crop or current pantheon of lean startup focused book is that what we're trying to do is a few things. So one is that these ideas around lean startup and customer development are applicable in many domains, not simply technology startups. And that's a pretty big idea. So if you're trying to innovate as if you're doing consumer goods or you're innovating in music, for example, you're a musical artist, you want to actually, you're the next Katy Perry. The lexicon of lean startups and customer development, product market fit, pivoting, which is often overused and abused term. Look, these all actually have meaning and are quite useful in describing how one goes about innovating. So we think there's this broad applicability to, again, innovation outside of tech startups in traditional industries, as well as in places like nonprofits and social entrepreneurship, where you actually see quite a bit of innovation. Actually, you don't see as much innovation as you should, but I think this book will help that. So number one, it's broadly applicable, and then two is that we're entering a pretty exciting age. I think is that you're seeing massive disruption, a massive wave coming down the pipeline where the internet, mobile devices, technologies like 3D printing, scanning technologies, and things like crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, which are sort of cultural technologies, are going to be massively disruptive. And we think that the lean entrepreneur is basically a guidebook that lets you navigate this coming wave. And when I say wave, I don't mean that in a glib manner. I think a wave, we're going to use the metaphor of surfing a wave, and this wave offers much opportunity, but it's also very uncertain, very volatile. And to surf the wave, you have to get feedback from the wave and act on it. If you watch a great surfer, that's exactly what they do. Right? They see where the wave's going, they act on the wave, and they let the wave propel them across the face of the wave. And this is very akin to entrepreneurs sort of navigating uncertainty in terms of innovation. And we think this is a pretty big idea, and seems like the timing is quite appropriate for this.
Well, and you mentioned crowdfunding as an example of kind of these innovations that are occurring outside of the tech scene, and namely, in this case, capital markets and securities regulation. Going back to the Lean Entrepreneur, you decided to crowdfund this enterprise, this publication. Can maybe tell our viewers a little bit about that decision process and maybe the pros and cons you weighed and why you decided to crowdfund publication of the Lean Entrepreneur?
Definitely. So before I do that, it's been fascinating watching Kickstarter go from a fun little website to a massively disruptive force, I think, in the future, right? So I think Kickstarter, sort of pioneered a lot of the crowdfunding stuff with very interesting projects, but then now it's become effectively, in my opinion, a tool, a disruptive tool for consumer electronics innovation. And so I've always been a fan of sort of this crowdfunding model. I always thought it was very interesting. I thought there's some stuff happening here. So I'm a believer. I've backed many projects, probably 30 or more projects, crowdfunded projects. And I thought, how can I get to experience this in terms of our book? I don't want to just, be an advocate for this. I actually want to do this. And so we wanted to do a few things. And one is we wanted to, clearly test market demand for the book. What's the demand for the book? Do people want it? Do the messaging resonate with people, with our customers? And we wanted to find sort of early adopters who for whom it would. And then we'd also wanted to, once they bought the book, we wanted to sort of test some of our material, some of the imagery that we're doing. So, for example, St. Grimlock is one of our collaborators. He's a very talented artist and he's in startups. And he's going to be doing the images for the books.